Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you and welcome to Unacademy, one-stop destination for English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we discuss the important articles which have appeared in the Delhi edition of today's The Hindu newspaper, analyze it for the relevance of the examination at the various stages, be it the prelims, the mains, or even at the interview stage. Now we shall be carrying out the discussion of the articles, the important articles which have appeared. At the end of the discussion, we shall pick up two of the main type of questions which can be framed from this, talk about how to create answers for those kind of questions, and we shall also be discussing a kind of an MCQ which can be framed from this area. Having said that, at the end of the discussion, I do advise you to visit our Telegram page and thereby attempt the sample questions which will be uploaded based upon these topics and analyze your level of understanding based upon today's assessment. Now, having said that, let us take a look at the topics that we are going to hold a discussion for today. So today in total we are going to have a discussion for 7 different topics, 2 of them slightly in greater detail for the perspective of your mains examination as well. That is, with Agni V test, India makes the MIRV leap. What is that MIRVing tech? So that has appeared in page 8, the FAQ section of the Hindu newspaper, relevant for your GS paper 3. How women in India have fared. This is a follow-up of a series of articles which have been appearing for the past week and a half, talking about women empowerment and their role in terms of labor force participation. So this has appeared in page 10. This can be relevant for your GS paper 2 as well as for your essay paper. Now, certain articles which are relevant for your prelims: Indian Navy ship rescues crew members and pirates surrender. Sickle cell disease, there has been a kind of a cure which has been brought forward by an indigenous company. So we are going to take that opportunity to discuss briefly about what that sickle cell disease is about. Then similarly, we shall be discussing about sea anemones, MeITy drops permission rule for the AI models. And Indian Patent Office grants 1 lakh patents in the past year, which is a record high. What is the implication of that move? It is also something that we are going to discuss. So starting with the first article of the day, and that is, with Agni V test, India makes the MIRV leap. Now this is something that has basically hogged the news headlines ever since Mission Divyastra was declared a success. Now, with this particular mission, what was referred to as the Mission Divyastra. Now, this was a mission whereby India successfully tested the MIRVing tech. What is MIRVing, or what is this MIRV? It basically stands for Multiple Independently Targetable Re-Entry Vehicle. So that test has been conducted and has been conducted successfully on the back of a reliable missile tech that we have, that is Agni V. Now, Agni series of ballistic missiles, they add a significant amount of power or strength to Indian strategic forces. Agni V, with a range of close to around 5,000 kilometers and more, certain estimates they also put that range to be close to around 8,000 kilometers from the point of launch, which means that almost the entirety of the region surrounding India, including the entirety of China, Pakistan, portions of Central Asia, even as far as Russia, and many portions in the Indian Ocean region also, shall be covered within the range and the radius of this missile strike. Now, this missile Agni V had been developed some time back, but it is this MIRVing tech which has been a new addition to the strategic forces. So why is there a need for a MIRVing tech? And why is it that this Mission Divyastra is being hailed as a major success, a major addition to our force deterrence? Now, for that you have to understand one basic aspect about the missile tech. The missiles which are developed, the intercontinental ballistic missile systems, what are known as the ICBMs. A missile to be classified as an ICBM needs to have a range of around 5,000 kilometers and more. So Agni V does lie in that range. Now, when a missile is launched, in a very simple terminology, a missile follows a kind of a projectile and hits its target. Right? Now that target is eventually destroyed or annihilated by this missile. But then the world has been changing. The arms race has taken a new dimension ever since the Cold War years. So that is when, during the Cold War years, you had countries thinking and rethinking the very simple philosophy about this missile tech. For example, when you talk about a missile, the missile has got various different stages, various different types of fuel stages. And that helps it propel forward towards its destination, which can be 5,000 kilometers in cases of certain missiles. It can even be 10,000, 12,000 kilometers and more. Now, the missile carries at its head what is referred to as the warhead. That is the explosive. That is the eventual destructive power which will destroy the target. So this warhead, ideally, until now what India had developed, that each missile will have one warhead. It can be a nuclear mounted warhead. It can be a conventional warhead, like a conventional bomb, which is not a nuclear bomb. So for each of these warheads, you need to deploy one missile. Now, during the time of the Cold War, when Soviet Union and United States, they were basically trying to outmaneuver each other in terms of the defense capabilities, you had the US forces discussing about it, that the warheads are cheaper, but the missiles, they are very, very costly. So if we are developing 5,000 missiles, it will be a very costly proposition. So why not go for a fundamental where, let's suppose, in one missile itself, we pack in 5 to 6 to 7 different warheads. As you can see, different warheads are mounted in that assembly. So what will that do? That will increase the punching power, because each of these individual warheads, they can then follow their own trajectory, they can be then controlled, and they can increase their kill radius. And at the same time, it will be cost efficient. This was the primary purpose behind development of this technology in the 60s, late 60s and the early 70s. It was for the first time tried out in the Minutemen series of ICBMs that US possesses. It was first of all tried out in the Minutemen III kind of ballistic missiles. Now, that is how the rise of MIRVing tech was observed. But then, various different countries since that point of time have acquired this multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles. And the reason being not only cost efficiency, but also in order to defeat the ballistic missile defense and ballistic missile shields that the other countries have developed. Just in case there is too much of terminology involved and thrown at you, let me also declutter what is this BMD or ballistic missile defense. So basically, as the rise of missile tech was witnessed during the Cold War, all the countries, they started working on the fact that how to prevent ourselves from that missile attack. So what they would do? Basically, they would follow the trajectory of the missile, closely monitored by the satellites and the radar installations which have been installed in various different areas, and they would follow the trajectory of these missiles. Once the missile trajectory had been locked, then you had an anti-ballistic missile weapon which would be fired and kill the missile in the mid-air itself. So that would mean, regardless of how many missile launches you would carry, it would not hit the enemy target because it would be destroyed mid-air. This was what was referred to as the BMD programs, or ballistic missile defense. India has also been developing its BMD program for quite some time now. Other than the Minutemen III, you had Soviet Union also following suit and developing its own MIRVing tech. Now, MIRVing also solves the problem posed by this BMD. That is, if you have, let's suppose, one missile, then it can easily be targeted by the kill weapon. But what if at this stage itself you have 5 to 6 independent warheads which then follow their own trajectory and then they follow a particular path? Maybe you will be able to shoot down one of this warhead or a couple of these warheads, but the other ones will hit the target. And that will create a kind of a plausible punching power. So that is where the various different countries entered into a new era of arms race. After US and Soviet Union, it was UK and France who also developed this technology. Israel is also said to have developed this technology, but then that is where it was limited to. Largely a yield or largely a hangover of the Cold War scenario that you can think about. China became the newly rising superpower almost a couple of decades back. That was the discussion in the global strategic centers and circles that China is going to be the new or the next superpower. Now, China initially did not have a very credible missile tech, but ever since the 1980s, China also started working on the ballistic missile defense program. Initially, it was marked by failures, but later on, it did achieve a significant degree of success. Then in 2015, China also declared that it had achieved the MIRV technology with the help of the deployment of multiple warheads in the Dongfeng 5 series of missiles. What was the DF-5? Dongfeng series of missiles by China is basically the ICBM, where the highest or the largest range of DF-14, Dongfeng 14, is claimed to be close to around more than 13,000 kilometers in terms of the kill radius. So once China developed this MIRV tech with the help of the Dongfeng 5 missile in 2015, that put India on alarm. Because regardless of whatever you might consider for our defense posture, our immediate threat is posed by our bordering nations, that is Pakistan and China. Now, while India had also been developing its ballistic missile defense and development program, simultaneously, this MIRV tech can defeat these BMDs, as we have just seen how. Now, in 2017, another nail was hit in the process. Pakistan also declared success in terms of developing this MIRV tech by testing the Abadil series of missiles. Now, while it is largely speculated and it is a known fact that for Pakistan the development of missile tech largely is outsourced by China. So in 2017, Pakistan had also developed this MIRV tech. That meant what? In the case of a first strike, these particular warheads can be deployed and they can have a large kill radius and they can potentially wipe out your entire defense posturing in the first attack itself. Now, India, ever since the development of its nuclear doctrine after the Pokhran tests, India had made its stance very clear that, look, we are a nuclear power, but we are a responsible nuclear power as well. So we won't go for a first strike, but then we will follow the principle of MAD. MAD is a principle in the defense circles which talks about mutually assured destruction. That means if you carry out the first strike, then India will unleash all its power to destroy the other forces. Now, if you carry out the first nuclear strike, then we will be having a kind of a position to deploy all our nuclear forces and wipe out the enemy country. So India has got this defense posturing. But let's suppose that first strike is carried out by Pakistan, which has got this MIRV tech. Now, with one strike, it can destroy majority of the missile bases, majority of the defense systems. That is where the deterrence, which prevents other countries from attacking you, that deterrence is put at risk. Now, India, after a long period of time, has finally managed to develop a nuclear triad in order to provide that defense posturing. A nuclear triad is what? Ability to deliver nuclear weapons by the way of the air, the sea, or also with the conventional missiles. that is even by aircrafts, even by submarines, even by the normal missiles, conventional missiles, you can basically deploy nuclear weapons and nuclear assets. So we have carried out we have finally completed that nuclear triad with the ongoing Sagarika missile tests and the deployment of INS Arihant and possibly INS Arighat as well. We have successfully managed to create that credible nuclear deterrence that if anybody can attack us, we will follow the principle of MAD. But here, that credible defense posturing or deterrence is further added teeth to by this MIRVing tech. And that is why this tech was so very important for India to develop on its own. We do not get that outsourcing help that our Western neighbor in the form of Pakistan gets. Now, this is a mission which was named as Mission Divyastra, right? Or the weapon of the gods. And the independent warheads that it would deploy will have a radius of 1500 kilometers. In the sense, let's suppose an Agni V missile carries out a strike and here the warheads are deployed. Now each of these warheads, they can be targetable, they can be maneuverable, and this radius will be 1500 kilometers, which is a huge area which is to be covered, and it can defy the military defenses of the enemy. So while largely it has been developed with such a great amount of pace, keeping an eye on China, because of the confrontation that India and China are going to have in the near future, as you would have heard about the news story as well, that the US congressional report and intelligence report also talks about the possibility of armed conflict between China and India. So in this scenario, India did need to have this MIRVing tech. So that is about Mission Divyastra. What is this MIRVing tech? Why it has been developed? And what is its role? Now, there has been a series of concerns raised about this. Immediately after India conducted its tests, there were a series of articles and essays written in various different media houses, think tanks, etc., whether this is good or this is bad. So it is not black and white that it is only good or it is only bad. As a candidate for civil services examination, you have to maintain that neutrality perspective to look at both the sides of the argument. So what are the advantages? Let us understand them, and then we'll follow up with the disadvantages that this system can bring. First of all, the advantage. Very simple. It will bring about a cost saving. Why? Because as we have said, that the warhead can be almost 1/6 the cost of the missile. So let's suppose development of an Agni V will take almost 100 rupees, let's suppose. Development of that warhead will take you close to around 15 to 17 rupees. So think about, this is just in point of reference. Please don't think that an Agni missile can be developed only in 100 rupees. So basically, you can have 5 to 6 of these multiple different warheads and carry them across, and that carrier missile system will be cost saving. Secondly, adds a credible nuclear deterrence, because your second strike capability will be much more enhanced. And for this, you need to develop, which India is very close to developing that, and that is deployment of this MIRVing tech in our submarine-based cruise missile systems and the submarine-based ballistic missile systems. The Sagarika series of missiles that we have, those Sagarika series of missiles are the cruise missiles with the range of 750 to 3000 kilometers as they are being developed. Then, the third advantage is improves the kill radius, defeats enemy defenses. So these are the advantages. But what are the disadvantages? There are disadvantages both at the tactical front as well as the strategic front. There's a difference between them. Tactical means what you deploy at the time of the battle. Strategic is keeping the long-term perspective and long-term outcome in mind. So One of the disadvantages that you can think at the tactical front is, now once you have a series of missiles having these multiple different warheads, so an enemy strike at that missile base can leave you more vulnerable, can destroy multiple of these warheads. So you are now more prone to enemy attacks at the missile bases as compared to earlier. This is one of the disadvantages. Second, to deploy nuclear warheads on top of this missile, you need the development of miniaturized nuclear weapons. For that, you need significant development, technological advancement, what are also referred to as the tactical nuke systems. So you need to develop those in significant numbers. For that, you need to import as well additional amount of these radioactive materials, and that is what raises the eyes and the ears of the global community as well. So that is another disadvantage, that is development of miniaturized nuclear weapons, nuclear warheads. That is another disadvantage, right? Other than that, on the strategic front, as had been witnessed since the development of the Minuteman III, MIRV tech and the ICBMs, that had spurred a kind of a arms race, a different kind of arms race between US and the Soviet Union initially. And understand, once this develops, there will be a counter technology development about the missile shields also. And that would lead to further development of missile tech which can penetrate these further advanced missile shields. So it is a kind of a vicious cycle. So it can always trigger in a kind of an arms race. And that too in a volatile region like South Asia, where, for example, we and Pakistan, we have basically stood on the verge of having that battle and the war multiple different times. You have had multiple different heads of states in both Pakistan and India who have basically thought about the idea of declaring a war, but then took a step back. So it is a very volatile region. In that volatile region, that arms race is never going to be stabilizing. Eventually, Pakistan will also, in a few days' time, the expectation is it will also carry out another test to indicate its success of the MIRV tech as well. So where does this end? And also, at the time when you deploy, let's suppose any of the country carries out that first strike. Now, there will always be a fear whether it is a normal conventional missile, whether it is a decoy, or whether it is a MIRVed up missile. And that would mean, let's suppose Pakistan fires one of the Abadil missiles, but it has got one of the warheads. Now, Indian Defence Forces, they detect that in the air. And rather than killing or they would try to kill that missile in air itself, but there would also be a perception that maybe there are multiple warheads that this missile can deploy, and that can trigger a massive response from the Indian side, leading to a complete annihilation of the other side. So that is where it also creates a room for a substantial disproportionate response to the first strike. And while that is good for credible deterrence, but it can be devastating in the long run as well. Okay, so these are the advantages and the disadvantages that you can think about for the MIRV tech. While it is good for the national defense posturing, while it is good for nuclear deterrence, but at the same time, it exposes us to the risk of a more volatile region in South Asia. Okay, so that is about this particular article where we have discussed about what this technology is, where it has been deployed, what is that mission Divyastra, why it is important, its evolution, the ballistic missile defense programs, and thereby the advantages and disadvantages, more than relevant for your examination, be it for your prelims or the mains. Now coming over to the second article, how women in India have fared. Now, this is a broad-based article giving you the perspective of, let's suppose, women empowerment in our country in comparison to the surrounding areas, the developing countries in general, and the perception that people have about the conditions of women in the developing nations and what is the reality when we talk about India. So for this, the author or the writer here basically starts by arguing the fact that when we talk about HDI, when we talk about gender equality, in all of these cases, women are basically left shortchanged. They don't have enough opportunities. That is where there is significant amount of discrimination carried out against them. But that is the case in most of the underdeveloped and developing nations, where the women, they are thought to be having a role of carrying out the household chores, of basically making and taking care of the babies, and sticking and restricting themselves within the houses, while the men are supposed to earn income. That is the kind of perception that has developed in the society. That is a social construct. Now, what this article also argues, that while this might be true for almost most of the developing and low-income countries, India basically stands to hold a different kind of a mirror to the world. In our country, the reality has had a kind of a departure in the sense that the free education program, the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, that has been carried out by the various respective governments, both at the central and the state levels, in order to improve the enrollment ratios, in order to provide free education, all that has been carried out regardless of the gender. And that is where the girl-child participation or the girl-child enrollment rate in the schools that have gone significantly higher. While that might not yield the results in immediate short-term future, but in the long run, that is going to show positive indicators in the society, because an individual who has received some amount of education, they are supposed to be, or they are in general, found to be much more enlightened, much more aware about, for example, their own health requirements and also the requirements of the society. That is where the future heralds a brighter scenario. Now, other than that, this article also argues that when we talk about, let's suppose, the graduation level and the after the school level, the graduation, post-graduation, it has been a trend where majority of the girls or the female gender, they have chosen up areas such as, let's suppose, arts, humanities, etc. Whereas it has been found out that in the STEM courses, that is science, technology, engineering and maths, in the STEM courses, there has been an overwhelming participation of the male members or the boys. So that is where the representation of the girls in the higher education, in the technological education, is only close to around 20%. Even if you talk about the faculties, the teachers, the professors in the IITs, IIMs, etc., there also the representation is only about 20%. So when it comes to a specified level of education, there the participation is quite limited. But there is a scope for improvement there. Right? So here, what are the challenges and the way forward that we can extract from this kind of a vague article? So the challenges that they face, first of all, is the social stigma associated and the societal pressures. Right? That is something that the girl always has to overcome, regardless of whatever she wants to achieve. She has to overcome this kind of a hurdle. Other than that, you also have reduced participation in STEM courses, Now, why is that the case? Because most of the girls, and again that will bring us back to the social construct, most of the girls, they don't have that expectation that we will carry out the studies, carry out a successful job career, and we will rise up the ladder to represent various different areas. The society successfully, over the period of centuries, the society has stymied the thought process and even the goals that the girls in various areas have. So they always think in a restrictive manner. And that is why when the time comes to choose what is the course that you want to choose for graduation, Post-graduation is again something where you have increased majority of boys participating. Girl participation in the post-graduation is also less. So when it comes a time to select the career option, they end up choosing something which they can make do with, not necessarily aiming to hone and shape up their career options. That is why participation in STEM courses are less. Now, then, what do we do in order to get rid of this problem? In order to get rid of this, you need to have dedicated counseling sessions at the higher secondary level itself for the girls to tell them what are the heights that they can achieve too. Simply having a poster of astronauts, of Kalpana Chawla, etc. in the classrooms, that won't help. You need to tell them, you need to guide them what they can do further. Then, regarding the social construct, what can be done? So for this kind of societal pressures that are exerted, an educated girl child can get rid of this problem for herself and for the coming generations, if at all. So that is where spreading this education is much more important. Increasing the enrollment ratio and also average mean years of schooling as represented in the HDI index. You would know that in the Human Development Index, you have a parameter which talks about average mean years of schooling. It is not only about getting enrolled in the school, but how many years are you actually attending the school. That is a kind of an indicator about how much you have gained from there or how serious you are about the education system. So that average mean years of schooling, that has to improve. Only then it can get rid of the societal pressures and the social stigma. Now, this also will be changed, will also be altered if we have a greater female participation in the political process. While you had the Women Reservation Bill which was cleared, but a greater women political participation is something which needs to be spread to the grassroots. As we have seen till now, that largely this participation in many of the states is restricted just for the namesake. For example, states like Bihar, if you consider, there the reservation for women has been provided at the level of the panchayats as well, right? But in most of the cases you will find that they are just simple figureheads and the real power is wielded by either their husbands or their brothers, brother-in-laws or the male members in their family setup. So that is where they end up getting reduced to a kind of a rubber stamp. And that makes a further mockery of the entire political process. So already we are confronting a very reduced political participation and exaggerated by these kind of instances where you would have heard about the terms panchayat patis, where the woman is the panchayat, but her husband is the one who carries the real power in that area. So that is where the political participation has to be made much greater, deepened, and also in a much comprehensive and all-encompassing scenario. So that brings us to the third drawback, reduced political participation. But then this article also argues that, look, we are not one of those countries which typically follows the path of low income and other developing countries where you will find women largely restricted to the kitchen and largely restricted to the household, because not only the level of education is increasing, now in today's India, we have had increased amount of women entrepreneurs, women representing various areas from arts to cinema to music to even sciences, but that is a lesser proportion which needs to increase. So that is where even when we talk about political participation, we are not a typical developing or a low-income country in the sense that if you consider, for example, United States, the so-called front-runner or a forebearer of democratic values, equality, etc. Now, United States has gained independence more than 200 years back now. It has never witnessed a female president till now. India, which gained independence only in 1947, we already have had the good fortune of having 2 women presidents. Similarly, when it comes to be it the Prime Minister or the important roles that the state machinery, or rather the country's machinery, has got to offer, India, even if you consider Pakistan, Bangladesh, the region of South Asia, the Indian subcontinent, the cultural aspect of it always talks about a greater women participation. That is where we have to overcome the social stigma, and we have to carry this forward in order to ensure that the future of the female population is in good hands and they have better examples to follow. Okay, so this is about what are the challenges, what can be done going ahead into the future. This is something, these are the points that you can highlight based upon the essay articles or essay pieces which are also asked in the UPSC examination about women empowerment and how to go about it. Now, let us consider some of the articles relevant for your prelims. So, Indian Navy warship rescues 17 crew members of hijacked merchant vessel, 35 pirates surrender. So this has been carried out again in the piracy hotbed of Red Sea, Bab el-Mandeb and the region of Gulf of Aden. Now that is an area around the African region, across the northeastern portion of Africa, what you refer to as the region of Horn of Africa. In the region of Horn of Africa and between the Arabian Peninsula, there you have the Red Sea, you have the narrow strait of water that is Bab el-Mandeb, and then you have the region of Gulf of Aden. This is the Arabian Peninsula, and the lower portion that you see is basically the Horn of Africa with Somalia, Eritrea, Djibouti. They border this vital sea lanes of communication. Now, ever since the Israel conflict basically flared out, since that point of time, Houthi rebels have been carrying out a series of attacks on the merchant vessels in this area. Now, as they are carrying out the attacks, already the flow of merchant vessels through this area has observed a decline. Now, because of lesser traffic, this situation has been exploited by the pirates largely originating from the region of Somalia. So this has been exploited by them. Because the traffic is less, now they find it easier to basically hijack a ship. So there was one of this ship which had a flag of Malta, which was registered in Malta. Now that Maltese ship was named as Ruin. Now this merchant vessel Ruin, it was hijacked by the pirates few days back. Now, what the pirates did, they took that ship and they converted it into a pirate ship. And with the help of that larger ship, because the pirates, they generally operate in small speedboats and small dinghies because they don't have that much amount of resources or money. So they converted this merchant vessel Ruin into a pirate ship, from where the aim was to target and attack other vessels, because now when you have a larger ship, you can obviously come in the way, you can cause deliberate collisions, you can force your hand much further. Now this, unfortunately for them, was being tracked by Indian Navy's one of the most potent destroyers that Indian Navy has, that is INS Kolkata. INS Kolkata, which is a destroyer class ship having a displacement of close to around 7,500 tons, means it is a larger destroyer, that started following the vessel. Now, when it was basically following that vessel, when it came into the close vicinity of it, and while it was carrying out the aerial reconnaissance, the naval personnel were fired upon by the pirates. And that gave enough incentive for Navy to now go full out and neutralize these pirates. That is where Navy basically took help of another of its ships, INS Subhadra, also deployed in that area. Navy also deployed the P-8I, the Poseidon aircraft, which India has bought from United States. Now that aircraft, the P-8I system of aircraft or the series of aircrafts, they carry out marine reconnaissance in a better way. It also deployed its C-17 Globemasters, the marine commandos, they were deployed, and eventually India managed to free that vessel all the pirates have surrendered. It desanitized the entire vessel in order to look for any kind of dirty bombs or in order to look for any kind of smuggled weapons. It has desanitized the ship and rescued all the crew members. So thereby averting another danger in the region of the Gulf of Aden and this commercial sea lane. So that is basically one of the great victories that the naval forces can claim in order to provide a net security cover in that region. Okay, so what is relevant in the prelims for this? The geographical connotation of it. What is Horn of Africa? Where is it that Bab al-Mandeb, Gulf of Aden and Red Sea are located? And also, what is INS Kolkata? Which class of ship? Because in the past month itself, within the past month, you would have heard 2 to 3 such instances where INS Kolkata has been deployed to basically help any other ship in distress. Now, then coming to the other article. Indigenous drug developed to treat sickle cell disease. So basically, sickle cell disease, which has been one of the major such diseases impacting large areas of our tribal community, that sickle cell disease is one of those for which cure for a long run and sustainable run is something which is not found easily. Now, you have a Delhi-based firm that is Acmus Drug and Pharmaceutical Limited. The name is not relevant for your exam. Now, this particular firm has developed a kind of a new drug which can be deployed or which can be delivered at room temperature itself and which has got a greater efficiency. But what is this sickle cell disease? Also, what is referred to as sickle cell anemia. What is that? So, this is a particular disorder which is inherited genetically, where the hemoglobin that the RBCs have, I hope we are aware that the RBCs, they carry hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the one which provides oxygen and is carried along with the RBCs in the blood vessels and provides oxygen to the cells, thereby providing that ability of the cells to give you energy at the end of it. So hemoglobin is very essential. But in the case of few individuals who inherit this disease, the hemoglobins, they develop a strand. As a result of that, the RBCs, their shape changes. So the normal RBCs, they are quite circular, as you can see. But the person who is impacted and who basically is suffering from this kind of a disease, for them, observe that the shape of the RBCs, they change into kind of a sickle. And because the shape resembles a sickle, hence the name sickle cell disease. Okay? Now, what are the basic implications of this? So once you suffer from the sickle cell disease, observe that the normal RBCs, they can easily travel through the blood systems. They can easily basically move through the blood vessels. So the normal RBCs, they don't find any difficulty in moving through the blood vessels and reaching the cells. But once the RBCs, they start deforming, then they start coagulating in certain areas. They start accumulating. That can cause blockages. Significant amount of blockage is caused. Now that blockage of the artery can lead to cardiovascular diseases, strokes, etc. So blockages are caused. Secondly, now in this case, you also have a scenario where the RBCs or the hemoglobin, that in itself has developed a kind of a strand. Rather than being the circular systems, it develops a strand. So there is development of that fiber-like scenario, and the hemoglobin is unable to deliver oxygen to the cells in an efficient manner. So that means the cells lack energy. And when the cells lack energy, the body system in itself ends up lacking energy. Then, other than that, you will also find that the normal RBCs, they can last for a significant number of days. Around 100 to 120 days is the life cycle of the normal RBCs, and then the body keeps on manufacturing newer set of RBCs. But because these deformed RBCs, they don't have the hemoglobin system working for them, that is why you will find that in the person suffering from sickle cell anemia, that churn out rate of the RBCs is much faster. The body makes RBCs every 10 to 20 days. body makes RBCs every 10 to 20 days, which is much faster. So much of the body's energy is basically utilized in that. Due to blockages, we have seen that there can be cardiovascular impact. There can also be inflammation, swelling, vision loss. Various different types of impacts and implications are faced. That is why sickle cell anemia is one of those issues that we need to solve. Now, it is passed on genetically. It is not a communicable disease for that matter. It is passed on genetically in the sense that basically, if you take a look at it, that any of the parent, if they have a sickle hemoglobin gene, right, a normal hemoglobin represented by the blue color, and the red color represents the hemoglobin which is defected. Now this hemoglobin, when it is inherited by the kids or the offsprings, let's suppose one of the offspring, they basically can inherit both the parents' healthy hemoglobin. So in that case, they won't suffer from sickle cell anemia. So it is not as if the parents are suffering from that, always the young ones will suffer. No, it is not that case. Sometimes it can happen that both that defective set of hemoglobin are inherited. That is when you have a complete sickle cell anemia. That is when you suffer from that. It might also happen that from one you have inherited the healthy one, from another you have inherited the anemic or the sickle hemoglobin. Now in that case, you become a carrier. You don't become an immediate sufferer, but you become a carrier. So the carriers, basically they have the tendency to pass on to the next generation. So these become the carriers who can pass it on to the next generation easily well. So that is how it gets passed on from one generation to another. So even this sickle cell anemia, the individual who is suffering from having both these sickled hemoglobin within them, now they will also pass it on to the next generation. That is how the probability of having a very healthy child is quite reduced. It is only around 25%. 75% probability is that this will get passed on from one generation to another. If we provide a drug or a cure at this stage, that is when we can end up removing this problem from the very base, from the very root. In India, the portions of the country in Jharkhand, in Chhattisgarh, in Odisha, in regions of Telangana, in many portions of Madhya Pradesh, in the regions of northeastern states of India, you have large number of indigenous community suffering from them, causing early death, maternal mortality, infant mortality that goes higher up. And many of the individuals, because they are suffering from this continuous manufacturing of these RBCs, they end up having a perpetual malnourished or the malnutrition condition. That is where for the social indicators to also improve, one needs to get rid of this problem. Okay? Now, moving on to the next article, that is starlet sea anemones use a neurotoxin to deter a predator. This is the kind of the sea anemone that you can see. Now these sea anemones, they are basically consumed, they are hunted by the species that you refer to as the grass shrimp. Right? Now, that is where the research has indicated that they end up emanating neurotoxins which repels this kind of grass shrimp, but at the same time, they also have certain neurotoxins which are emanated basically to attract those species of fishes which can hunt these shrimps, so thereby increasing their own protection. Now, when we talk about sea anemones, what are these? These are marine species which come into the category of Asnidaria. That is, they can be considered to be close relatives of corals, jellyfish, etc. And they are found at various different depths, from very close to the tidal surfaces, tidal waters, to a depth of even around 5,000, 6,000 meters from the sea level, you'll find these sea anemones. Now, these sea anemones that you see, they largely resemble a kind of a plant, but they are actually animals. You will find they have large number of tentacles, and these tentacles, they help them in capturing food. And just like in the case of the corals, you have a simple body structure where the tentacles direct the food to the mouth or the central orifice. That is also the way of consumption of food by these cnidarians, by these sea anemones. Now, these sea anemones, they have a kind of a glue-like enzyme which is secreted from their bottom, which helps them stick to the rocks. And that is where they don't end up moving from one place. They are not mobile species. They are rather sedentary species, which stick into one area and who remain in that area for a long period of time. Now, they appear to have, or they do indicate, a kind of a symbiotic relationship, a mutually beneficial relationship with the clownfish. The clownfish that you observe, they have a mutually beneficial relationship. How? So first of all, the clownfish, they are easily able to escape their predators by hiding in these sea anemones. That is how the clownfish benefits, right? And basically, the clownfish, when they carry out various food sources and other materials close by, the sea anemones also feed upon them. The clownfish has got a kind of a mucus layer around it, so it is not impacted by the various proteins and various neurotoxins that are released by the sea anemones, so they are able to save themselves. But having said that, ever since the ocean acidification has gathered pace due to global warming, we all know that the ocean is turning slightly acidic. So that acidification process, as it is happening, that has reduced the clownfish's ability to detect the predators and hide in these sea anemones. So the acidification of ocean impacts the survivability of the clownfish and eventually the survivability of sea anemones as well. Okay, so that is relevant for the portion of your environment and ecology based upon the type of questions that you see being framed in the examination nowadays. Now, MeITy drops permission rule for the AI modes or the AI models. So basically, Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology had come out with the AI rules. Now, it talked about the fact that in order to generate, let's suppose I as an individual have brought out an AI product. Now, for that AI product, before I go to the market, release it and launch it in the market, I have to take permission. In the sense, I have to get an approval from the government. So this was largely criticized because this is not something which is backed by a legal entity, but is a kind of a censorship nonetheless. So your artificial intelligence tool or a product has to have some amount of censorship, but no legal backing or guarantee of that censorship. That is why it was considered to be flawed. And this is something that was discussed in the DNA article in detail on 15th of March as well. So that is where the opposition was. Now that permission thing has been taken out, right? This makes it much more easier for the companies to bring their AI-based products to the market, reducing the level of regulation. Because going ahead, the market is going to be about AI and AI only. So most of the products are going to be AI generated. So if you have that kind of a regulatory mechanism which is put in, that will lower the speed and will act as a hurdle. Okay? Now, then moving to the last article of the day, and that is Indian Patent Office granted 1 lakh patents in the last year. Now, this in itself is a record high, because almost a decade back, the number of patents filed were a meager few thousands. India has shown a remarkable increase in the number of patents being filed every year. Still, we are much behind our competitors like China. China has been doing this large numbers for almost a decade and a half now. So what is a patent? So when we say a patent, it is a statutory right for an invention, statutory legal backing for an invention granted for a limited period of time. It is not as if, let's suppose I have developed this e-pen or a smart pen, and I will have the patent for it running up till 100 years from now. It is a restricted time period, right? Now, why? That it is granted to the patentee by the government in exchange for full disclosure of what that product is about, and the purpose is to exclude other competitors from basically copying your product and going to the market first. Because if you have developed that particular product, you have a patent to it, means only you will have the intellectual property rights for that product. Okay? In India, that granting of patent is done by the Patent Office. That Patent Office basically is governed by the Office of Controller General of Patents, Design and Trademarks, which lies in the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. So you can have a question that Indian Patent Office is under which ministry? So Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Now, the norms, they follow the Patent Act 1970. It is as per the norms of Patent Act 1970, which has then later on been amended in 2003, 2005 in order to add and modify that Patent Act 1970 as per the latest requirements and developments. Okay, so these are the things relevant for the prelims perspective. Now, let us take a look at the sample question. Consider the following statements about the sickle cell anemia. So you have 3 statements about sickle cell anemia. Body is slow to manufacture the RBCs, can cause arterial blockages, leads to a perpetual cycle of lack of energy. How many of the above statements is or are correct? Only one statement, only 2, all the 3 statements are correct, or none of the statements are correct? Think about it. Take a look and find out the answer on your own. It should not be very difficult, and write it in the comment section below what your answer is, so that we can also take a look whether you are correct or not. Now, coming to the practice questions. What is Mission Divyastra? Discuss about the force multiplier effect that the MIRVing technology brings. So, in the introduction, briefly talk about what do we mean by Mission Divyastra, and you can directly jump to it, but in 25 to 30 words, you talk about what that Mission Divyastra is about. Now, after that, in the body, talk about the MIRVing tech, right? Because you would have introduced that in Mission Divyastra itself. Talk about that MIRVing tech, draw a simplified diagram, and talk about the purposes that it solves. First of all, it has to be brought out in the positive connotation initially. And that is where you talk about the aspect that it can defeat, it is cost effective, defeat the ballistic missile defense systems, it can add a credible nuclear second strike or nuclear deterrence. All that you can talk about. In the later part of the body itself, because it is a 10 mark, you don't have a lot of scope. So in the later part of the body, however, the emergence and development of this tech and adoption of this tech also brings along with it multiple set challenges at the tactical and the strategic level. And then talk about them in the points. At the end of it, talk about it that how this technology has added teeth to the Indian strategic forces, but one needs to be at the forefront of technological development in order to maintain that cutting edge going ahead into the future. So here, by that conclusion, you have basically provided a positive angle that a way forward. What is the way forward? Way forward is develop that technology. So you have not said that India should arm itself more, but you have said technology should be developed. Right? So it doesn't put you in a hawkish stance, it doesn't put you in a negative stance as well. That is how you can conclude the answer. Bring out the progresses made by women in India and suggest measures to improve their participation in the workforce. This is a 15 marker. You can expect these kind of questions in the essay paper also. So here, in the introduction, talk about the fact that almost 45% of women or 45% of the population globally is constituted by women, and that is where their emancipation and empowerment is important for the global well-being. In India, then talk about it that the status has been plagued by societal pressures, social stigmas, and various other issues thereby. Talk about the issues, talk about the way forward, how to increase that labor force, talk about how despite all of this, you have a green shoot. So in the later part of the body, talk about that green shoots are emerging in areas of entrepreneurship, arts, sciences, etc., and even in terms of political participation and representation. Having said that, this needs to improve even further. Conclude by having one of the quotations. Let's suppose an educated woman basically brings about an educated family, anything of that sort, and you can end the answer. Okay, so that is how you can answer this. Look at the multiple choice question. What is the answer? Answer it in the comment section, and that is what is going to mark the end of the discussion for today. I do suggest and advise you to visit the Telegram page and take a look at the other sample questions also, as the prelims is approaching close by. You need to be able to assess your level of understanding. So that will be all from my side here today. If you have liked the video, please don't forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button. Till we meet again, do take care of yourself. Goodbye. Thank you.